So last section. So it's almost 8 o'clock, but I'm gonna go ahead and finish this last section. It's probably gonna be at least like probably half an hour or so. So again, like as I said, like if you gotta go, great. That's no worries. We're gonna record this and send this out, but I want to get through this last section and end this at a good place. Because I think this once we do this last section, it cuts the class in half pretty well. So. All right, so we're going to kind of dive into white privilege and what that means. So I'm going to play this really quick clip of the co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Toronto, Janaea Khan. She talks about what it really means.
We need to change our relationship to how we understand privilege. A lot of folks, when they hear privilege, because of course we're not in an educational system that's supporting a sense of personal responsibility to each other. And so unfortunately for some of you at the age of 18, 19, you're in maybe a classroom and somebody says privilege for the first time, maybe it's you, and the whole room explodes. And everyone's like, you don't know me and you don't know what I've been through, because what they're hearing is you're saying you've never been through anything in your life. Let me be clear. Privilege isn't about what you've gone through. It's about what you haven't had to go through. So sometimes I think it's about reframing our relationship to how we understand privilege to begin with. Yeah, it's a very binary thing. You're either privileged or you're oppressed. And meanwhile, everybody in this room we're all of those things. I'm an able-bodied person. I'm neurotypical. I'm quite charming.
Right. So I think that's just a great way to define white privilege, because when people first hear white privilege, instantly, a lot of times we go to class because we're such a class society. We instantly think, that you're talking about, I was born with a silver spoon or something like that. When in reality, a lot of times, white privilege is it's not about arguing there that you had a hard life, or like there's a lot of white people that have a lot of hard life. I mean, all of us experience different things, but a lot of it's about not that you've had a hard life, but that what you didn't go through. On top of that hard life, you didn't have to worry about police brutality. You didn't have to worry about being discriminate against work, or school, or all these different things that we're going to be talking about. And that's really where white privilege comes. The idea of it comes is kind of defining all these things that white people don't have to deal with. And really, I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time, but I think one of the people that really launched this idea of white privilege was Peggy McIntosh. She wrote the White Privilege: Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And there's a really great TED Talk that she gives about how she created this. It was back in I think the late 80s or something like that. Yeah. And she wanted to write a paper on white privilege, but she was struggling with this idea because she was a PhD person. She was a woman at the time. Dealing with patriarchy, dealing with all these different things. She had not had an easy life, so it was really hard for her to kind of extend that. But slowly, she just created this list over several months of just thinking about all the things that she doesn't have to do that that people of color, Black Indigenous people of color do. And she ended up creating this list of 50 things that was really powerful. We're going to read a little bit of it, but she started this out by kind of defining this quote: white privilege refers to the unquestioned and unearned set of advantages, entitlements, and benefits and choices bestowed on people solely because they are white. Generally, white people who experience such a privilege do so without being conscious of it. And then Rachel Cargill, amazing activist. Everyone should follow this person on Instagram. She's really powerful what she writes, and also she creates all these teachable moments with by diving into her very racist comments and really exploring this and creating these moments of education. And I've learned an enormous amount just by following her. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. She wrote, "White privilege has nothing to do with who you are as a person. It has everything to do with the systemic realities of world that we live in, which oppresses people who are Black and benefits who are white at all levels of society." And again, so here's some more great definitions. Teach and Transform is another great person to follow. It's just a whole bunch of awesome resources as well. But I want to read this one in the bottom corner, Hooligan Nova, because it's important. Because a lot of times, people will hear, like you'll hear people say, "Hey, you're coming from a place of privilege," and then a lot of people will immediately get, have a reaction to that. That's not good. So this is kind of explains what that means. It means all it means when people say you're speaking from a place of privilege is that you're likely to underestimate how bad the problem is by default because you are never personally exposed to that problem. It's not a moral judgment how difficult or of how difficult your life is. So when people say that, you're coming from a place of privilege, it's because you've never personally experienced, or the trauma of like police brutality, or of like, losing a loved one to police. So then when you have your opinion on how we should reform the police, you may get that you're coming from a place of privilege. And that's where where a lot of these debates on like when people talked about like identity politics and how a lot of that identity politics, a lot of it's like civil rights and political. It's about marginalized groups kind of voting in people from their communities, and that's people, white people label that as like some tribalistic kind of thing. It has nothing to do with tribalism, and it's so, and please stop saying that. It has to do with the fact that they know the only people that are going to really realize that things that they're going through are the people that go through it every day themselves. So it's about getting more diversity into our government, not because it's some tribal thing, but because it's the only way we're going to actually get policies to treat, to start changing what's happening to a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color. So and then so this is straight from Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. So I'm just going to read a couple of them, but there's like 50 of them. You should read them all. It's really good. But the first one is, if I should need to move, I can be pretty sure renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live in. So that's true. I mean, I feel like I can, as a white person, I can move anywhere, as long as I can afford it. There's places I can't afford, but as long as I can afford it, I can move anywhere. And that is not something that's afforded to non-white people. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I do not have to teach my children how to survive an encounter with the police. And that's a super important one. It kind of leads to this next conversation. So this is a great one. So if anyone ever has trouble, like if you have family or friends that are just not getting white privilege, this is a really great video to send them to. So this is a bunch of Black parents that are having conversations with their children about police encounters.
We actually have a line that we do at our house. We practice this thing. What is it?
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
That's just kind of a thing we practice at our house. There are great police officers out there. There's also some police officers who are not so good.
And my fear is that you run across one of those bad ones.
For some reason, people of color have always been a target by the police.
Before they became a policeman, they were a person. And that person took all their ideas and all their thoughts and all their prejudice into their job.
Why would a police officer assume that you did something bad? Maybe because of my skin color.
I remember being put in handcuffs for something that had nothing to do with me. I was literally walking in the mall. Cops slammed me on the ground, busted my lip, chipped my tooth. That actually made me really mad.
How about the time they pulled us over with me in the car and arrested me and left all of you guys sitting in the car and nobody knew how to drive on the side of the road because the bumper on the car was kind of hanging off? We live in Puyallup. There's people that don't even have a bumper on their car.
My rear brake light wasn't working, and I got to my destination and they were working.
I was about your age, actually. They grabbed me.
Why?
I didn't know at the time. They just grabbed me. They threw me onto the police car.
I got tased that time. That time they tased me because they said I wasn't complying.
Ariel, are you okay?
What's wrong, baby? I'm okay. I'm alive, all right? Every day I get to see you. I get to do this, right? All right, come on. Let's calm down. Let's finish this, all right? You good? You're making me cry. Come on.
You have to be careful when you're out there in this world because this world's not going to always be honest or fair to you. I know, Sean, you got a little bit lighter than the rest of them, so it's a possibility you won't get stopped.
Sound like you just pulled him over.
Okay. If you're driving, cop pulls you over.
Police gets out the car, comes to the window. What would you do?
License and registration, please, ma'am.
Why do you think I pulled you over?
I don't know, Tommy.
When a police officer says something to you, don't, you're black. You can't be looking at them saying, oh, I don't know, why don't you tell me?
Well,
that right there is giving them the license to pull you out of your car and physically harm you because it will be done.
Don't get upset. Don't get sassy. Why did you pull me over? You don't have, I know how, just follow instructions and stay calm.
Okay. Do you think just being a police officer?
All right. I definitely want to stop you here, but definitely worth checking, the rest of this movie or video out. And someone actually wrote down, that the title is actually Conversations, Not Conversations. If you're looking to try to find this, but I'll send the links to this video as well. John Greenberg, another activist, and I think he's a high school teacher and anti-racist activist, kind of expanded on Peggy McIntosh's 50 things and added a couple more. A couple of things are like, I have the privilege of having a positive relationship with the police generally. I have the privilege of attending segregated schools of affluence. I have the privilege of finding children's books that overwhelmingly represent my race. I have the privilege of soaking in media blatantly biased towards my race. And we're going to talk a lot about like the media and children's books in next week's class. I have the privilege of escaping violent stereotypes associated with my race. And I have the privilege of being insulated from the daily toll of racism. And I have the privilege of living ignorant of the dire state of racism today. So I'm gonna play this another video. So Charity Croft, if you don't know, I mean, he's kind of a comedian as well. A lot of times I'll play things that are trying to be funny, but it's not because I'm trying to bring a comic relief to this subject. It's purely like the content is really good. Actually, this might be like very similar to like the MTV stuff. It can be a little bit cheesy. Actually, some of the stuff is you're going to find cheesy, but I'm not playing it as for on how funny it is. Just the content is really well. They really go into like all the different types of white privilege. But just give me a heads up. It's a cheesy one. Oh, where's the, okay, there we go.
What's good? My name is Charity Croft. Have you ever been called unprofessional for wearing your hair the way it naturally grows out of your scalp? Is your race accused of being terrorists for wearing scarves on their heads? Have you been stereotyped as a thug, terrorist, gang member, ghetto, lawn mowing guy, rapper, or immigrant for no reason at all when you were just like standing there? Well, if you said no to most or all of those questions, then you, my friend, have what is called white privilege. White privilege. Yes, Jacob, white privilege. He sings well. That's all the black privilege we get. Oh, and also he plays basketball. It all started with a basketball, y'all. But we're not talking about rapping, dancing, singing black privilege. We're talking about world-dominating, culturally appropriating, ruling almost every nation white privilege. Now, what in tarnation is white privilege? I'll work for everything I ever got. I tell you what. I'm sure you did, Mr. or Mrs. White Privilege, but your skin made it way easier. White privilege means no one questions why you got into that really, really great school or how you got that really, really great job. It's just assumed that you're highly qualified. White privilege is living in a country in which 87% of the lawmakers look like you, despite the fact that your race makes up nowhere near 87% of the country. White privilege is Googling the word beauty and it's showing hundreds of pictures of white women. White privilege is Googling the word God and it's showing hundreds of pictures of white men. White privilege means you don't have to worry about being monitored in the store because you look like you steal stuff. White privilege is being 6 times less likely to be arrested than black people. White privilege is your history being taught as a part of the core curriculum and mine being offered as an elective. White privilege is reading a history book that doesn't start off with you being a slave or a barbaric savage. White privilege is being able to teach history only from the perspective of the colonizer. Speaking of colonization, white privilege is being able to get lost at sea thinking you're going to India, end up somewhere else that already had millions of people and still be credited as discovering the country. In fact, white privilege is when anything that you didn't know about is a new discovery as soon as you notice it. White privilege means the ability to protest racism, ask for equality, and not be considered a hate group. White privilege is also having a hate group like the KKK be listed as a non-violent Christian organization and not have the rest of your race be labeled as terrorists. White privilege is not having your application thrown out because your name is weird. In fact, white privilege is when anything that's not regular or common to your race is weird. White privilege is being able to walk into a church, kill 8 people, then be walked out by police and taken to Burger King. White privilege is not having the celebration of your entire race's contributions to the world relegated to just 1 month because we talk about the cool stuff your ancestors did every month. White privilege means you won't be told to go back to your country. White privilege is being able to come to a country and literally massacre 90% of the indigenous people and then enslave the other 10% and then say it is your God-given manifest destiny to shine from sea to shining sea. So you continue to slaughter the whole country and then give it your own name and your own laws, and yet you are never called a terrorist or a warmongering murderer or a psychopath, but instead you get your face literally carved on the side of the very mountains in which you stole, and thereby glorified forever as not a deranged killer, but a founding father who did something courageous and beautiful. Well, how can we move forward if we dwell on the past? Plus, I mean, there were white slaves in America too, right? No, it was not. Well, not quite, but there were indentured servants. And in the slave codes of 1705, especially in the act concerning servants and slaves, colonial rulers so graciously awarded the poor whites certain legislated privileges. In fact, Chet, tell them what they won. A small plot of land, wages after their sentence was over, the right to sue masters in court, and exemption from public whipping for punishment. While at the same time, the legislator wrote down the laws which provided the institutionalized foundations for chattel slavery for Africans. What's in the chattel slavery package, Chet? Well, all sorts of horrible things like pulling apart families, sending children, mothers, and fathers in 3 different directions, free beatings for speaking in your native tongue, casual lynchings and public beatings, rape, and many other atrocities for a couple hundred years. So bad it's almost good. Really? Of course not. From that time on throughout U.S. history, to be white, even to be poor and white, has meant to have access to certain forms of preferential treatment or privilege. Now, this is not said to make white people feel guilty about their privilege. It's not your fault you were born white skinned, and I get it. You're not your ancestors. But whether you realize it or not, you do benefit from it, and it is your fault if you do not maintain awareness of that fact. White privilege is absolutely a thing. And being able to deny the fact that it is a thing simply because it doesn't affect you is even a further testament to its existence. Our world has been purposefully skewed in the favor of white people. And no, you aren't responsible for your ancestors' doings. However, if we do not recognize the problem, then we can never truly remedy it. The first step to enlightenment is awareness of the darkness.
Okay, I'll stop it there. I didn't play that for the comedian act. It's just the content of the thing, the different ways that that white privilege comes out from our history lessons or our actual history to how we're treated in our jobs. I just felt like the content of this was really good, or spot on. I think so. Another thing about white privilege is not needing a qualifier. So a qualifier is kind of like an adjective, describing somebody. And this Michael Mark Cohen, I'm going to read this quote real quick, summarizes it. White privilege is the right of whites and only whites to be judged as individuals, to be treated as a unique self possessed of all rights and protections of citizenship. I am not a race. I am not the unmarked subject. I am simply a man. Whereas you might be a black man, an Asian woman, a disabled Native man, a homosexual Latina woman, and on the identification goes. With each keyword added, so does the burden of representation grow. Sometimes the burden of representation is proudly shouldered, even celebrated, but more often the burden of representation becomes a dangerous, racist weight, crushing and unbearable. Michael Brown was killed in part because of that burden, the stereotype of a black male criminality, and his body continues to carry that weight as a protest mounts, the martyred symbol that Black Lives Matter. But white men are just people, normal, basic humanity. We carry the absent mark, which grants us the invisible power of white privilege. Everyone else gets some form of discrimination. And so a lot of this, how this plays out is, you see this in the media, and you see this in the schools, like when like a white, like Dylan Roof, was just like that, this individual white person that committed these horrible crimes, but then like if like a a Muslim terrorist, or someone that commits a massacre, of a Muslim faith, they're a representation of how the whole Muslim culture is violent, or if a white person can, commits a crime, that's his act individual only, but if the black person does, then that's, just proof of a black criminality, so we see this play out, and especially in the next class, we're going to really dive into how this plays out in the media as well. All right, so I think this is the last long quote I'm going to read, but this is a really good one that I think is really important. It's about when white friends don't believe blacks' experiences. Mary C. Curtis wrote this. I'm pretty sure this is the last quote, so I'm sorry for people that are had enough of my voice, but 45% of blacks say they have experienced racial discrimination by the police at some point in their lives. Virtually no whites say they have, according to a recent New York Times poll. So when I share the trauma of that particular incident, or so many like it, fraught interactions that may have involved a son, stop driving a nice car in a nice neighborhood, nephew or friend, I expect, first of all, that I will be believed. Yet whites are frequently disappointingly incredulous. They very often a friend's reaction that goes something like this: I don't think a police officer would stop anyone for no reason at all, or you must have done something suspicious, or my favorite, if we haven't done anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. I am not some child coming home with some telltale. I am certainly not a delusional liar. I don't expect much. Just nodding and acknowledging my words would be enough. Instead, jumping in to explain what must have really happened before I can finish a sentence means that whether you realize it or not, you've shattered an important bond and traveled the distance from a friend to acquaintance. I smile, make a mental note, change the subject, realizing that with this person, topics from now on will be limited to rating entrees at latest neighborhood bistro, or judging whether the new Scorsese films, shows the master back in top form. And Jared Wilson, another great quote, kind of summarizes this and what it means to not believe black people, experiences of racism. He says, to imply that black folks are lying in a widespread way about racial injustice is itself a kind of racism, because it assumes that they cannot be trusted to be accurate translators of their own experience. So when you don't believe a black person when they're trying to tell you their experience of racism, you're not only not being a friend for them, but at the same time you're expressing that you don't even think they're they're even capable of understanding the situations that experience it. So that in itself is another form of racism. So we played this clip. So it's a movie a while ago. I think it was back in the 90s. It's called Color of Fear. I'm just going to play this quick little clip from it. But it's basically the premise was they took two black people, two white people, two Asian people, two Latinx people, and they put them all in the room for a whole weekend and had them talk about race issues. And there was a lot of great conversations. I mean, it was a really great movie, but I want to play this clip about Victor Lewis. He's one of the black guys I'll just play it. It's really powerful.
There's a certain sort of silent consciousness about or what it means to be American that I sense coming from white folks that I'd like to talk about. But before I do that, I'd like to say one more thing that's hard about talking about racism, and that is that people of color are spilling their guts and doing education to white people. Let me explain to you how you've got this wrong. Let me explain to you how you've got that wrong. Let me explain, and then we get cross-examined, and it's like, well, maybe your problem is blah, 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 blah. And it's always, racism gets looked at as a person of color's problem, and it's not. We're like on the receiving end of the problem, but we're not the problem. I walk in a world where black people, where Latinos, where Asians, where Arabs, all these different people are experienced as problem people, and that, well, we're going to deal with the person of color problem, when in fact, racism is essentially a white problem. And that for you to understand what racism is about, you're going to be so uncomfortable. You're going to be so different from who you see yourself to be now that, there's just no way for you to get it from where you're sitting. And I'm not saying that you could never get it. I mean that you need to step outside of your skin and step outside of what seems really comfortable and familiar to you, and launch out into some real, for you, unknown territory. And you haven't gone out there, like you haven't, gotten in proximity to Black people, as you say, because you don't have to. And that's part of what it means to be American, to me, is to have all these things that you can do if you want to, that you don't have to do if you don't want to do. And there's a way in which American and white and human become synonyms. That why can't we just treat each other as human beings? To me, when I hear it from a white person, it means, why can't we all just pretend to be white people? I'll pretend you're a white person, and then you can pretend to be white. Why don't you eat what I eat? Why don't you drink what I drink? Why don't you think like I think? Why don't you feel like I feel? God damn it, I'm so sick and goddamn tired of hearing about that. I'm sick of that. That's what it means to be human being to me. That's what it means to be white. That's what it means to be American. Why don't you come the hell over here? That's what I hear every goddamn day. And you know that I can't come over there. You know that this skin and that this hair and that this way that I talk and that I think and I feel will never, ever get included, because I'm unpalatable to this goddamn nation. I'm unpalatable. You cannot swallow me. You cannot taste me. You cannot feel me because you don't want to. You think that you can survive without me, but you can't, man. You think that, hey, it'll all be fine when we just treat each other like human beings. And what that says to me is, don't be yourself. Be like me. Keep me comfortable. Connect where I'm ready to connect. Come out to my place. Or maybe I'll come down and get some artifacts from your place. That is bullshit. When you say that your ethnicity is American, there is no American ethnicity. You had to throw away your ethnicity to become American. That's what it means. That's what it means. You give up who you are to become American. And you can pretend that it's okay because you're white. When we give up who we are to become American, we know that we're dying from it. You're dying from it too, but you don't know it necessarily. Get ethnic, you know? I'm not going to trust you until you're as willing to be changed and affected by my experience and transformed by my experience as I am every day by yours. I attended.
All right. Yeah, I just find that, I mean, just the whole speech is just so powerful, especially like the last line, I'm not going to trust you until you're as willing to be changed and affected by my experience and transformed by my experience as I am every day by yours. And that really hits on like the whole white fragility and the white centering and the respectability politics and how we need, Black people to tell us these things, in certain ways, and we're not going to accept it, or they need to be tone police, or they need to be all this stuff. And when the reality is, like when he says, like, you're not going to, for you to understand racism, you're going to have to be so uncomfortable with, you're not even going to recognize yourself. And that's really with, what I consider like getting past that white shell, and really kind of open up to the realities of racism and what's happening. And yeah, I know. I mean, it was definitely a passionate speech. So I don't know if anyone else felt something or wants to comment or something. I'll give it a little bit before we move on. All right. Well, feel free. Yeah. We can talk about this afterwards as well. So a big part of being, having white privilege is just, like you said, have the ability to ignore, ability to not, not be a part of this. I'll just read one of these quotes, but it says, here's the thing: to walk past a Confederate flag and feel nothing, to cheer for the Redskins and not feel inferior, to watch how the media discusses Muslims as a monolithic group of violent people and not think twice is a privilege. You're tired of people talking about these issues. Let's get rid of all the passive aggressive institutional reminders and inferiority. It's unfair to stop talking about being Black when I drive down roads named after Confederate soldiers who fought to keep me as a slave. The ability to ignore is a privilege. Closing my eyes to these issues is to deny the core of who I am. And just like I mean, just reality, like especially for myself, if I want to ignore racism, literally, what all I have to do is basically close my computer. That's like the reality. I mean, there's other reminders. I see it, as I'm going, and work and things like that. But I'm really good. I can ignore that stuff. It's almost like I have to choose to acknowledge it, and that is in essence of like how white supremacy survives. It's just it's just it's so easy to ignore and to get past. And we hear this a lot too, like, but people like summarize it as like political. There's a it's like there's a demonization of what it means to be political, being political. Like a lot of my friends would say, oh, I'm not political, they speak of that as like this wise thing that they're above all this bickering and all the politics and all this stuff. And in reality, like, I mean, this, it's great that you can just walk away, but you can walk away because you're so privileged. It doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, there'll be some changes in your life based on politics, but not a whole lot. But for the others, like for this quote, I really like this quote by India Moore. For it to be politics to you is a privilege. This isn't politics to a lot of people. It's their safety, it's their future, it's their health, it's their employment, it's their shelter, their freedom, it's their life. So. All right. So New York Times did this really great bit where they did all these interviews with people who were white and then people who were black and different ethnicities and races and stuff. And it was really powerful. There's a whole series to it, but I'm going to play the white one because I think it's some really honest assessments from white people.
It's very uncomfortable to talk about race. It's not something. It's not something I do. I am feeling apprehensive because I think there's a lot of reasons why I feel like I should be able to talk about race.
I don't want to say anything. That would offend anyone. It's a very touchy subject. It's still difficult, even if you feel like you're on the right side of it, to have a dialogue about it.
Especially for white people, because we don't want to see if the racism that we may be holding on to.
I don't know. Maybe I am racist. I certainly don't like to think that I am. And I think that's too because the perception, in this society, perception of a racist is a guy in a robe.
Now I understand that it's a system of advantages and disadvantages based on race. So as much as there's the disadvantage piece of it, there's the advantage piece of it, which is what I experience as a white person.
I want to bring up race, and I want to bring it up in a frame that helps my children think that there's no difference. But the mere fact that I might be bringing it up could suggest that there is a difference.
I remember asking a friend of my father's who's black why he was called black, because his skin was brown. And I've learned that lots of people that are white ask this question, and maybe they also received the answer that I got from my parents, which was like, oh my gosh, we're so sorry that she asked that, and it's just a term, like, move on.
One of my third grade students seemed pretty rocked after the Eric Garner case or death, and came up to me and said, why, when you were little, like, were you worried about this stuff too? And I knew what he was talking about before. I mean, I didn't say, what do you mean, what stuff? I didn't want to, play dumb. And I said, no, like, I didn't have to be, and that's not fair. And that was really hard because he just kind of sat there, and it honestly seemed like the first time that he had considered the fact that not everyone had to think about race all the time.
I know that I'm white, and I guess I'm part of that collection. But I don't think about being white. I don't.
I really did not know that I had a racial identity. I knew I was white. I had no idea what that meant, how that had shaped my outlook on life, how that had shaped my sense of optimism, sense of belonging, sense of safety, sense of feeling entitled to go help children that I thought were part of a community that couldn't figure out how to help themselves.
I think that impulse, that kind of colorblindness impulse, comes mostly from white people. Like I've never heard. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure it comes from all people of all kinds, but I've heard it most from white people who are saying like, let's do this as a way of getting past this racism thing. And I think in part it comes from a sense of shame and guilt about what racism has done, and kind of how racism was built by white people.
I don't want to be ashamed of being, and plus I'm a male. It's like every group out there can be pissed off at me because I'm white and a male. And that's a weird kind of burden that some people do feel. And I certainly feel it sometimes from people that I'm privileged. I get stuff that other people don't get.
I think we're all implicated in a racist system, and I play my part in it as a white person. So I do have individual responsibility and accountability. I mean, I'm part of the system, and I do things that both perpetuate it, and I try to certainly do things that challenge it.
I realize I've never said anything. When I've heard racist jokes, when I've heard racist comments, I've never said anything. I've never spoken up and said, hey, that's racist. Not once.
In my mind, I'm not involved in any conflict that involves race. I've only been the beneficiary of it. So to talk about it is I don't think I would sound very wise.
Being white means that I have the privilege to think that I'm not affected by racism. Or that I don't even have a race, because I have all these other things like a gender and a sexual orientation, and those are pretty neat. So I don't have a race, but I do, and I'm white.
All right. Like I said, there's a whole series of these, and they're really well done. And I just thought there was a lot of really honest and opinions. Even the people that I, maybe necessarily didn't agree, it was still very great perspectives. Like the guy I was talking about, like the burden of, I'm also a man, I have all these burdens, and just to think, I think that's the result of white fragility is that you start seeing your privileges as, at least when talking about them, as these burdens that you have to, which that is that reactionary thing to it. When in reality it's just like kind of stepping back when you just see all of it, the systems that we're living in. And it's not, it's not your fault, but it's also your responsibility to kind of dismantle a little bit. Julie L, that hit home for me when she said that she has never spoken up, and I feel like that is a position of power that also I also have, and I also conflict and verse, but didn't feel like it. That is again privilege. Yeah, thank you. I mean that's true. I mean that reminds me a little bit we actually have a whole class on a couple whole classes on just how to actually confront racism, because it's scary and it's crazy. It's like we teach people about racism, teach that it's wrong. We teach white people you need to get out there and confront, but we don't teach anyone how to actually confront and how to actually assertively communicate, and then it just results into like I have a lot of social anxiety when I get in confrontations. I feel like I'm having a panic attack until it's over. But I'm actually thinking, because that's more towards the end, but I think I'm going to shoot some of that, record some of those, like just like techniques and things that can help us kind of like be better at confronting and doing it in ways that aren't super anxious and super awful and in super bad ways. So I'm thinking I'm going to actually tape some of that and kind of play some of that, and not wait 8 months, but try to play some of that in the next couple of weeks. So as we're learning this stuff, we can also learn techniques on actually how to do it better. Like cool. Yeah, because that's all right, so we just have a couple more slides left and one more quick video. So probably about, maybe about 10, 15 minutes left, just to give you a heads up. Probably, maybe a little less than that. But some of the stuff we've already gone through, we talked a lot about this in the first class, like, the privilege of deciding what is red. White privilege is about, white people being in positions of power get to define racism. I'm just going to read this. Teju Cole wrote this great article, but I'll just read this quick quote. There is an expectation that we can talk about sins, but no one must be identified as a sinner. Newspapers love to describe words or deeds as racially charged, even though those cases when it would be more honest to say racist. We agree that there is rampant misogyny, but misogynists are nowhere to be found. Homophobia is a problem, but no one is homophobic. One cumulative effect of this police language is that when someone dares to point out something as obvious as white privilege, it's seen as unduly provocative. Marginalized voices in America have fewer and fewer avenues to speak plainly about what they suffer. The effect of this enforced civility is that those voices are falsified and blocked entirely from the discourse. And we're going to talk a lot next week about PC culture and cancel culture and all that stuff, and how a lot of that is the people that cry cancel culture still have very powerful voices and are still making tons of money. And actually, there's the people that are actually being canceled, the ones transgender people, marginalized populations that are losing their voice. They're the ones that they're labeled as the oppressor of so it's just, we're going to talk a lot more about that later, but I think that's a great kind of how yeah, like I said, we'll dive deeper into a lot of that stuff. To kind of talk about, we talked about this before, the moral authority, that a lot of white people, we get to, because we're in power, we get to define what is racism. And that's why a lot of things, we've taken this into this point of like racists are just bad, evil people that we're not a part of, that have bad hearts and want to be explicitly racist, like the binary that Dr. D'Angelo talked about. And also we open it up to where, white people can also be victims of this racism, reverse racism, and further action by making racism just like an action of hate, not like actual systems and things like that. So yeah, that's a big part of privilege. Julie wrote a couple comments. Let's see. When I tried to bring up issues of race and racism with my mom, she shuts me down and says I'm obsessed and my kids and my grandkids are black. Obsessed, she is uncomfortable avoiding conflict maybe. Also, it's easy to post stuff on Twitter or read books and do passive stuff, but to really speak up to coworkers, family, that is a work. Yeah, for sure. That's where it needs to happen, for sure. And there's a lot of different ways and strategies, like we said, that we can talk about, particularly like calling people in instead of calling them out, and figuring out different strategies and ways to actually where they'll actually hear you and you can actually have dialogues, for sure. But it's not easy. I mean, there's no silver bullet to this stuff, and a lot of it ends pretty awful, but it's definitely where we need to be. Another point I want to point out too is this white privilege. Part of whiteness is believing, a lot of people have talked about is believing that you own everything, that we have, there's no words I can't say, there's no places I can't go, and there's no debates I can't have. And this happens a lot. We see this a lot. I know with a lot of my friends, this insistence of debating other people's humanities, debating whether, marginalized populations are really experiencing racism, or if it's really that bad, or if they really deserve, any civil rights protections and things like that. And that is, we got to get away from that. That is just such a, like there's a quote below. It says, we can agree to disagree on trans issues. No, we really can't, because disagreeing with the validity of someone's identity and the rights and services they deserve or don't deserve because of it is discrimination, not disagreement. So we have to understand, these conversations are not, they're not just like, casual dialogues. They are forms of discrimination. I'm gonna read this one up here. It sounds like, like a little exaggerated, but like this describes so many people in my circles. It says, "Hi, I'm a white dude who likes to play devil's advocate because other people's struggles are theoretical to me. It's fun to debate your rights. I'm here to exhaust you so I can stop progress and maintain the status quo, which serves me. I'm uninterested in learning. Your frustration is my goal." That sounds a little extreme, but like that just hits that on so many people I know that have these conversations, and it's important, that's white privilege right there. I'm going to read this last one of this quote. When it comes to social justice, friendly debate usually means unpaid emotional labor in which you are pressured to be super patient and kind to me while I invalidate your humanity and the humanity of people you love. People's lives are not a thought experiment. All right. His last speech. So I'm going to kind of preface this because this is definitely touches on some slippery slope ideas and stuff. But I want to talk on this last speech. I think this is the last slide, and I think we're going to play a video, and that's it. But this last slide, I want to talk about this idea of free speech versus white free speech. And this isn't, I'm not for censorship. I'm not for, I understand like Eleanor Holmes, our delegate in DC, she created a career off of, a civil rights attorney, and she would represent both, she represented a lot of civil rights groups, and at the same time, she represented once the KKK, because she believed that, taking away the freedom of speech of anyone, was a slippery slope, that we can lose freedom of speech to everyone. So I'm on board with that. And I honestly, I don't know the answers to this stuff, but I think we do need to recognize that the negative consequences of a lot of our free speech in this country are not equally felt. They mainly fall under, Black, Indigenous, people of color in communities. So, and like I said, I don't know the answers to this, but I know that we need to at least recognize this. Because there's a lot of debates happening right now where that are just kind of like ignoring this reality. For example, when a Black person goes onto a college campus and gives a speech about how all white people are evil and we need to harm them or whatever, that's only gonna go so far. But when a white supremacist, goes onto a college campus and gives a speech about, how white people are, superior and Black people are inferior, and they're also, criminals, and we need, violence to protect ourselves. That is tapping into 400 years of white supremacy, of these internalizations of, after slavery. I mean, we sold this idea, in order to continue to oppress Black people. We sold this idea that all free Black people were criminals and were violent, and we needed violence to keep them under control and protect white people. Violence, whether it was the KKK, whether it was the police, whether it was the state violence. So when people give these speeches about white supremacy, it's not just like a normal speech. It's tapping into these internalizations, and I'm not saying like one speech caused these massacres, but when you look at a lot of these terrorists and a lot of these white supremacist massacres, in their manifestos, they are directly linking things to what's being said in our media. Like the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter. So that was the largest Jewish massacre in this country, from my understanding. That happened, I was thinking last year, when a white supremacist went to a synagogue in Pittsburgh and killed a bunch of Jewish people. And when you read his manifesto, it was like directly like, I mean, he was from, this was during this was actually 2018. This was during the election season, and what Trump and Fox News and a lot of political right were pushing were these ideas that, if you remember, they were pushing these like scary migrant caravans were going to invade us in the South. And they were even pushing, what we call cultural Marxism, where we add anti-Semitism to that, like George Soros and all these racial political dog whistles that they were financing, that Jewish people were financing these migrant caravans. They were about to invade us. And that the guy who shot Pittsburgh, the synagogue, he wrote in his manifesto, I mean, he specifically picked this place because that synagogue works with relocating refugees from south of the border and asylum seekers. Like, this was, and the thing is, like, I mean, how we define, hate speech and how we define, discrimination and racism on a legal standpoint is we, I don't know, hopefully you watched in the last class we talked a lot about the 70s, the Supreme Court, there was a battle to kind of define what all these, 60s civil rights bills, meant, how to actually, set legal precedents and things. And mainly, like, Nixon's conservative judges won, and they were able to create this idea of it's called a proof of malice, that in order to be culpable of discrimination, of racism, of hate speech, there had to be a proof of malice, which was basically impossible to prove. It's like in some, like spy movie where the spy, is captured and the evil person is going to kill him, but just before he kills him, he tells him his entire plot. Like that stuff never happens in real life. You literally need to write down saying, I'm doing this to specifically hurt Black people. So because of that, it's very hard to link all these things like hate speech and to link this to with the intent, because the Supreme Court decided specifically not to look at the outcome of this stuff, but to only look at the intent, and it had to be a proof of malice. For example, I just read this article, over 60 people since May, Black Lives Matters protesters have been run over by cars. Like 60 people. Has anyone heard of that in any of the news? No one's even talking about that, but that's like 60 people have been run over, and you can't tell me that's not directly linked to Trump and Fox News demonizing these protesters as like terrorists that are threatening our country, and you can't, it's impossible to deny that connection. But at the same time, you can't, legally, unless Trump specifically says get in your car and run over a protester, there's no legality. So like I said, I don't know what the solution is. I'm not for censorship, but I also know that we need to understand that there is a difference when white people spout these ideas. It's not just tapping into a couple people, it's tapping into centuries of internalizations of these anti-Black, anti-Indigenous internalizations. A lot of times, we also need to understand about liberty too. This is a country that was founded on liberty, but there's so many different ideas about liberty. Like classical liberalism is this idea that individual rights and property rights is the most important and the highest values, and then people have the right to pursue their self-interest regardless of the cost to society or to land or to other people. Property rights are more important than environmental regulations and things like that. But then social liberalism is more about the idea that people have the most liberty when we're looking out at everyone in society, and when we have things like regulations and environmental regulations and things like that. So I think this idea is that we really need to kind of explore. Our founding fathers definitely wanted classical liberalism. They wanted, basically to be able to do whatever they wanted for a small percentage of people, regardless of the effects on, everyone else, on women, on indigenous populations, on Black people. So but we need to decide, what do we want and how like I said, I don't have the answers on this one, but I know at least we need to recognize this, because right now we're seeing this really play out in a lot of different cancel culture and stuff. Harper's Weekly just published this letter of 150 academic people and authors, including J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter person, who's writing all these very transphobic tweets. And if you look at just how many transgender people have the most violence, the highest rates, disproportionately speaking, have the highest rates of violence in any Black transgender people. And if you look at that, and then she's claiming she's being silenced and she's a victim, when in reality, transgender people are, she's supporting a system that's killing transgender people. So it's really, it's tough, but it's also something we need to recognize, because the other side, the side that has all the power, is going to keep on pushing that as an excuse anytime they get called out at. So like I said, I don't know the solution to this stuff. I don't, I'm not for censorship. I do think we need to revisit our Supreme Courts, and we need to get rid of this proof of malice, and we need to start looking at outcomes, making people responsible for outcomes, not in their intent. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that we all need to kind of be aware of this and the real ramifications of this. Yeah, Julie says it feels like the alignment of freedom and liberty and libertarian. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that was just, I was just wanting, and we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper in cancel culture and political correctness and all that stuff next class. But I just wanted to kind of, this is a white privilege to not really understand the effects of our free speeches. Okay. So I believe this is this is the last slide I'm going to play tonight. It's a quick video. It's a spoken word. It's really powerful. And then we're going to probably end it here. And I'll stick around if people have want to talk things out a little bit more, have questions and things like that. And I think for the rest of the class, I'll go ahead. I'll record them over the next couple of days and send that out to you all. But I'm going to play this. Kyla Lacey wrote this spoken word poem on white privilege.
We learned your French. We learned your English. We learned your Spanish. We learned your Dutch, your Portuguese, your German. You learned our nothing. You called us stupid. That's white privilege. And I'm sure it probably hurts for you to hear those two words, kind of like gunshots and explosions from those commissioned to protect you with whisking past your ears. What is white privilege? It is the only 5 decades of legal acknowledgement expected to correct 400 years of white transgression. It's crack versus cocaine. Blacks receiving almost 20% longer sentences for the same exact offenses. Like, for instance, a black man without a record is less likely to get a job than a white felon. Or maybe it's because we're lazy and we don't work hard enough. Like, what the fuck? 400 years in the same field literally is an incredible resume builder. It is Katrina answering the government's prayers of eugenics, Dick Cheney going fishing the next day, Condoleezza on a shopping spree, Bush in San Diego, but Kanye is the one you call crazy because, like, it only took the USA 2 days to get aid to Asia, but 5 for FEMA to get to Canal Street and Esplanade. It is the one black kid who beat the shit out of the odds, but only thanks to Sandra Bullock, Michelle Pfeiffer, and the White Shadow, so now we all can make it. It is the only time thousands of white people are cheering for the black kid to win is in the stadium. It is you looking at me crazy if I told you to go back to Europe, even though we didn't have a say. It is you all of a sudden having a problem with immigration, like this isn't even your nation. How the hell do you discover some shit that wasn't even missing to begin with, you Columbus, our traditions? Had white girls twerking in high definition, multicolored hair and purple nails, but it was ghetto when we did it. Oh, I make you uncomfortable. Try a cramped slave ship. But wait, slavery is over now. It's just called the prison system because, like, you're not racist because you don't use the N-word, but y'all use niggas every day. What is white privilege? It is the acceptance of bombs over Baghdad, but not over Boston. It is European history being taught as a major and African as an elective. It is learning about my people only 28 days, like I'm not black every fucking second as every white boy. But to fuck my braids out, not because I'm pretty, but because I'm pretty for a black girl. It is people thinking that Africa is one nation. It is the waving of the Confederate flag like you didn't lose the battle and then telling us to get over slavery. It is people saying that black people destroyed neighborhoods, but forgetting that white people have destroyed continents. It is every time I bring up my plight, some white man has to tell me that I'm crazy, but is kind enough to praise my English or say that we are all given the same opportunities, even though he has a family history of wealth and I don't even know my family history at all. Is the justification of police brutality. Like, what did that person do? I'm sure it doesn't hurt as much when the victim doesn't look like you. It is people thinking that affirmative action is an unfair advantage instead of keeping the qualified from being unfairly disadvantaged or throwing out a qualified applicant because their names sound too African American. Is Newports imported into black communities, but black boys exported for weed as big plastic asses that are called fat when we naturally have them. It is an Australian woman whose new classic of rap music is everyone who hears this poem dismisses all this truth I just spit as reverse racism. That is white privilege. Thank you.
All right. Well, all right. I actually want to end this this section about white privilege on this last slide, just kind of highlighting a couple last thoughts. I really like this one quote, "Dear white people, it's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it your whole life." Because I know a lot of times when we're struggling to learn about this and hear about this, it could be overwhelming, especially when you don't know where actually how to respond, or when you're still learning about this stuff, or when you're just feeling overwhelmed. But also, it's important, take care of yourself, but it's also important to understand that this is a privilege for us to learn about it and to try to dismantle it, as opposed to all the people that have to live with it every day. So please try to keep that in check. Keep that as a reminder as much as possible.